Hi everyone, welcome. I'm over here at my VermiBag Mini and I just couldn't remember exactly how long it had been since the last check-in. And since the bin is 118 days old today, it was 105 at the last check-in. It was 13 days since the last check-in. And over here too, it seems like it was 11-day interval between feedings last time. On this occasion, it's 13 days since we last checked in on these guys. The system is now 118 days of age and has been fed 9 times. So today's check-in is going to be feeding number 10. And as you can see, I've got this plastic draped out over the top of the surface, evidently creating enough moisture circulation over here to, attract worms. So there's at least one worm over there hanging out on the top surface. Kind of sluggish though. What's up with this guy? You would think that the lights and my fiddling with them would have resulted in some sort of a reaction. There we go, just chilling out and relaxing. Let's evict this little guy off this feeding zone indicator so we could set it aside and get to work over here. This thing can actually go in as supplementary bedding as part of the feeding today, because I've got some more coffee and coffee filters for them today. In fact, with 2 days worth of coffee here, we've got enough to pretty much set these guys up with 2 feeding zone indicators. It's just something that I've never even really done much in my my VermiBag. Besides their food, I'm also equipped with a couple other things off on the side here. I've got my worm chow, I've got the grit that I apply sometimes to their feedings. I've even got some supplementary bedding, my prepared bedding, which I think we just opted not to add bedding last time, even though it might have been on the ready, because we came in here last time and there was so much of this top dressing, leafy matter scattered everywhere that even when we had brushed it off to the side, we still had a hard time accessing the surface to probe into the system to see how things are progressing in here. But I think that even if they don't seem like they need it because they've got so much here, I think this stuff will just sort of blend it in, and then we will also blend in, or at least use, some supplementary bedding, perhaps as more as a foundation for the feeding today. Because I do want to continue increasing the volume of this system, because there's so much space in here. There's definitely room to grow. And I don't know, I'm just sort of I'm smelling some citrus. I must have put some lime or lemon or something in here last time, and I must have brushed up on it and disturbed it a little bit. So whether or not we bump into any leftovers of that, that's the one sort of food that usually does kind of show up as leftovers, because it's a little bit more resistant to break down for whatever reason. Certain things break right down, other things take a little bit of time. But I mean, after 13 days, I don't really recall what kind of stuff we placed in here as food for these little guys. If we don't see many leftovers, then that's oftentimes not too big of a surprise. The stuff that we are definitely going to bump into, though, as leftovers are these pumpkin stems. I mean, these pumpkin stems weren't even part of any sort of feedings down here in the VermiBag. These stems actually came with the worms from their old home. These worms had originally lived over in my yellow buckets for 6 months before they all got thrown in here along with their finished castings. So I didn't harvest any castings from these worms during their last transition from one home to another. I simply piled everything that it was accumulating in those, I think it was 4 buckets, right into here, thinking that, hey, I've got all this beautiful castings material, but since I don't really need it right now, placing it in here with the worms is a great place for it to just sort of continue sort of maturing and becoming more and more finished over time, even if the worms aren't really cruising through too much of it down low. There's still the microorganisms within the material continuing to work that stuff down to make it even nicer. And I guess in the interest of keeping that stuff nice and undisturbed or littered with any of this material that floats around at the higher levels near the surface, I've been resisting the urge to dig down very deep, although once in a while I do think it wouldn't hurt to just sort of probe down a little bit deeper just to see how things look down there, if for no other reason than to observe how moisture is holding up down there. Besides the plastic coverings that rested out here on the surface, I also have a plastic piece of bubble wrap that kind of skirts the system. You know, even though the material itself also has a plastic covering, as you saw in the beginning, I also cover the lid of the VermiBag. It's a zip up cover that has a huge vent, just a mesh panel through which a lot of air can flow, but with the air can also flow some moisture and exit the system. We haven't worried too much about the moisture level because we've always had the squirt bottle on hand, so besides supplementary bedding, besides worm chow and grit, the other thing I've got over here on my off to my side over here is my squirt bottle, with the assumption that we might want to add a little bit of moisture if we need it, if we feel like we need it, you know, because the sometimes we found that the material out on the surface was a little bit drier than we would want it to be, so we sprayed it all down nicely, and I don't know, it almost feels to me like it might be unnecessary to add moisture, because I only had to dig a little bit down into the material and brush the dry stuff away from the surface to reach some material down here that's got some really nice moisture content to it. So, you know, I think we are digging a lot deeper now than we have in the past, during the past few check-ins, kind of breaking the rule that I gave myself. But I have been suspicious that perhaps the absence of worms at these higher levels was due to moisture and that maybe they were down deeper, but I feel like we're seeing a lot more worm activity now here than we have in past check-ins. Perhaps a sign of us restoring moisture to a point where the worms favor it better. As we go a little bit deeper, I feel like we're seeing less and less residue mixed into the material, which is kind of the idea, and I want to keep it that way. So I'm not going to go any deeper than this. I did sort of probe down a little bit. I took a peek, but then I put that nice finished material right back down where it was. And I don't want to contaminate what's down there with any sort of uncomposted materials and stuff like that. Not that I'm going to be harvesting this material anytime soon, but I don't know, just in the interest of keeping it sort of pristine and clean, so that at some point in the future when I do decide to open the harvest panel at the bottom and eject some material, what we're in store for is going to be some really nice castings. So I think we're going to come in with some of my prepared bedding. It's got a good moisture content to it as well. This stuff is shredded paper and cardboard with some leaves mixed in, and then it's all dampened and it just sits around. So I don't know if we have to go too overboard. That was a pretty good sized handful. I mean, we could maybe just give them a little tiny bit more. Why not, right? And a lot of times my worm chow only comes into play. This is my worm chow here. It's in large part just a mixture of ground up pumpkin seed, and it's also got some of these weird vegetable noodles. So not flour or grain based noodles, but some vegetable based noodles that have just been sitting around here for way too long, and I included them in this batch of worm chow too. So I figured maybe we can just dress up this nice little portion of bedding down here with a little something to chew on. Now I think we could start coming in with other old things like all these pumpkin stems and some of these bits of paper and whatnot. You might have saw in our little collection of paper, our food items was some additional paper besides the 2 feeding zone indicators that we're going to probably just rest on top. There was also a couple soiled napkins. So why don't we just bring those in now before we forget. These are those things that I'd like to also include as sort of foundational bedding down underneath all the juicy foods that are going to spill out their fluids and then make this stuff perhaps less bedding and more food after it gets soaked with all the delicious vegetable juice. So there we go. That's a pretty nice foundation with all my prepared bedding and then some napkins, some coffee filter material. Let's not forget to return all these old pumpkin stems down into the feeding zone too. To me, it just seems like putting them where the greatest amount of activity is anticipated is possibly the best way to ensure that they have some good worm action on them to help continue the breakdown. This is by far the largest of them all. And I've been doing my best to not break anything off of these over time, although you can see right here is a pretty cleanly chipped off segment that I accidentally broke one time when I was sort of trying to press the thing down underneath the surface. So I prefer not to usually do that, although I could change my mind and start adopting the practice of trying to help those objects along as well towards the breakdown stage rather than prolonging that and observing how that happens naturally without my help. So what you're seeing here is mainly tomatoes that came out of my garden, and a lot of these were probably still green when I pulled them off the plants probably a month ago now. But some of them have really just started to really degrade to the point where they seem unsalvageable. There's also some chunks of lettuce here, cucumber peel. So clear evidence of salad being prepared. And today we get upgraded to having 2 coffee filters to indicate to us where we last fed. Unusual in a system where we would normally not even include any sort of feeding zone indicators. Let's set these aside until we've leveled things off, and then we could return them and position them in here in their rightful place above the feeding zone. Not that you need a feeding zone indicator in a place like this, because you're always going to be able to come back and find it pretty readily if you ask me. So sticking to custom, more worm chow in on top of the coffee, and then this slightly brighter, whiter substance that looks similar as the crushed eggshell that I like to use as the grit in my systems. Another pumpkin stem, pretty small one, kind of flat. And now I think we've done a pretty good job blending in a lot of this residual top dressing leafy matter that had been resting out here on the surface, because now I just don't feel like I see quite as much of it anymore. And that's probably a better place for it. As much as I like that nice natural appearance out on the surface with all those lovely leaves, I know that the leaves are way better off down in the bedding where the worms can more easily nibble on the stuff. It's after all, it's in here for that purpose, not for me to gawk at it and be so impressed by its lovely natural appearance, but it's in here to be nibbled away and broken down by the wormies. And by keeping it down within the bed, keeping it damp, it's just going to help that process along significantly better than if it just sits out here on the surface, potentially a little bit drier than it would be otherwise, resulting in it seeing very little action. So all that remains is to bring back our nice piece of plastic here to cover up with. And today I think we're going to just bypass the application of moisture, which we've done on the past couple occasions. Even though my squirt bottle's right here within arm's reach, I don't think we need it. I think we're in good shape. Alright everyone, that's it for our check-in with the VermiBag now at day 118, getting feeding number 10. And that was a pretty good size feeding, but not very big. Maybe we'll be back in here a little bit sooner next time than 13 days, but 13 days did seem like a reasonable amount of time. And they were due. I think they were due because I didn't hardly see any leftovers. Did you? I don't know. All right, everyone, that's it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.